My name is Shawn Bullock, and I was born in Fountain, St. Vincent, but I currently live in Toronto. My mother's name was Cynthia Bullock, and she was from Calder, and my dad's name is Vincent Bullock, and he was from Fountain.
All right, tell me a bit about your grandparents.
Oh, well, there's a lot to say. My mother's mom, she was Agatha Batiste from Calder, commonly known as Auntie Clara to most of the village. She was born in 1912 and died in 1994. And my mom's father, he was Clement Bullock, born in 1914 and died in 1993. Agatha's parents were John Baptiste and Rosanna. Clement's parents were Nathaniel Bullock, who had the Indian name Jadu. He was born in 1888 on Christmas Day and died in 1971. And Pappy Clement's mother, her name was Sarah Ledger. Jadu, he was the youngest of Ram Bullock and Bunty's, who came from the Thomas line. Uh, he was the youngest son for them, and they both came from India to St. Vincent. Sarah Ledger, she was the daughter of James Ledger, and together they had children Clement, Rona, Gertie, Oral, Estelle King, Olga, Lawrence, Bertie, Ennis, Owen, and Hubert. And then Sarah, she passed away during childbirth with Hubert. And Jadu had two additional children with Estelle Alexander. They were Joseph, who still lives in Calder and is the last surviving child, as well as Conrad. On my mom's mother's father's side, his name was John Baptiste, and he was the son of John Akko, who came to St. Vincent from India. I don't know much about his wife, Rosanna. They say that her last name was Jagmohan Singh, but I don't have confirmation of that. They had a number of children as well, and their children carried three different last names because at the time the churches used to baptize children and give them the name of the designated godfather. So in this case here, we had Bobby Batiste, Agatha, my grandmother, Simeon, Osley Batiste's father, and Alec Batiste. And then we also had Uncle George Hills, as well as Auntie Attell and Uncle and Great Uncle Joseph Alexander. On my dad's side, my dad's parents were Ishmael Bullock, born in 1907 and died in 1976, and his mother was Vera Morgan, born in 1918, and she passed away in 1985. Ishmael's parents were Samuel Bullock. His Indian name was Man, and his wife was Virginia Harry. Samuel was the first son of Ram Bullock and Bunty, so that would actually make my mother's grandfather and my dad's grandfather were brothers. And their children, my grandfather Ishmael's his brothers and sisters, they included Ivans, Walter, George, Cecil, Robert, Axley, Edward, Rosalind, Benjamin, commonly known as Uncle Benji, Estelita, and there was one other child named, I'm not sure whether the name was David or Daniel, but he died relatively young. On my grandmother Vera's side, she was the daughter of Catherine Backus and James Morgan. And Catherine and James, they had a number of children as well. They included my grandmother Vera, her sister Eusina, her brother Reuben, her brother O'Neill, brother Leroy, who lives in the United Kingdom, Uncle Evans, Auntie Elise, who you actually interviewed her in the previous series, and then there was also Auntie Ellen, Uncle Ennis, and Uncle Samuel Morgan. Catherine's parents were Babu Bacchus and Rebecca Bagamonte Dean. Babu was also the son of Ram Bullock Singh, and Rebecca, she actually came to St. Vincent at the age of 4 with her parents, Kalu and Mary Dean, as well as her brother Nalu, who was 9 years old at the time.
Are you aware where your grandparents lived when they arrived?
When all the Indians came, they all, for the most part, lived in Argyle, and they slowly moved to different areas over the decades. Jadu, he moved to Calder. Samuel, him and his family, they moved to Fountain, and then Grandpa James and great grandma Catherine, they moved to, I believe, Hopewell or Richland Park area.
Okay, and do you know their Indian names? And if so, what are those names?
Know of some of them. So, as an example, Nathaniel Bullock, my mom's grandfather, he was known as Jadu, and my dad's grandfather, Samuel, he was known as his Indian name was Man, and he was commonly referred to in the village as Cha Cha Man, where Cha Cha means uncle in Hindi. Uh, Auntie Elise had told us that Grandpa James Morgan's name was Tootsie Diaz. And I know great grandma Catherine, she was commonly known in the village as Jananum. And my great great grandmother Rebecca Dean, when she came from India, according to the Indian registry, her name was Bagamonti. And I remember my dad telling me a story about when his grandmother Catherine went to go get her birth certificate at the registry, and they were looking everywhere under the name Rebecca Dean, and they couldn't find anything. And ultimately, they did find her they found the records of her registry under Bagamonti.
Through the research, I know that you're able to dig up some information that you might be able to share with us. What do you recall finding about life in those earlier times, and the types of houses they may have lived in, the religions they belonged to, etc.?
So I know that when they all came from India originally, they were all assigned to estates as indentured laborers. They weren't allowed to leave the estates without permission, and times were tough during those times. But for my own personal family, I know that my family that came from India, I believe they were all baptized in the Methodist Church in St. Vincent at the time, and some of them later changed to different denominations. But for me, I'm a fourth generation Methodist. I know though that I was told by Osley Batiste that Ram Bullock, our great great grandfather, that he was originally an Indian pundit, and he used to go by the seaside to pray every day. And those are some of the memories I have of how things were when they were growing up.
And Ram Bullock was the father of the Bullocks, the Bacchuses, and the Roberts, correct?
Correct.
Do you recall any particular stories about your grandparents or great grandparents that you'd like to share about maybe their roots, the Indian names and culture, upbringings, etc.?
Sure. So I remember Babu was a member of the group of Indians that got arrested for and jailed for leaving the estate to protest the living conditions and treatment of Indian workers at that time. And some might even consider that group of Indians as national heroes. I know my grandfather Ishmael, he had gone back and forth to Kuwait during World War II to work in the oil field. That was something that they needed, and it was alternate work for the Indians at the time. I think my grandpa Clement may have gone to Aruba as well. I know now. I've heard a lot about my grandfather Clement. He was the oldest of his siblings, and he worked as an overseer at the Argyle estate. I was told that he was one of the most educated out of all of his siblings, and he spoke four different languages, including a rare language from Aruba called Papimento. And I was also told that he had a position within the village. It was kind of like a judge for the Indians back in those days. If there was an argument between two Indians in the village, they would have their matter heard by my Pappy Clement, and he would be the person to make the final ruling on how the issue would be resolved. Other things I remember was my great grandfather James Morgan. He was a sawman or a woodcutter working in various different areas, cutting down trees and cutting them into actual boards to build houses and that type of thing. That was his main profession.
Well, you're no elder by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm sure over the years you've learned a lot from your elders in terms of, things that happened way before. And I'm sure you had some memories as well as a child. Do you wish to share those at this time?
Sure, I guess my most treasured memories are just the time spent with my grandparents and my great aunts and uncles, learning about their lives, asking them questions, having them tell me about the hardships that they went through working on the estates, that type of thing. I always remember my great aunt Olga sitting me down one day and telling me about when her and my grandfather Clement were children. They had to work on the estates from morning, from sunrise to sundown, picking digging arrowroot. And I remember her telling me that Pappy used to get paid. I think I don't know if it was 1 cent a week or 1 cent a day, but she had the exact same quota as him, and she had to dig the same amount, but she only got paid half a penny because she was female. And those are the type of things that always stuck in my head to remember who we are and where we came from, coming from those days to where we are today.
Thank you for sharing all that information. Quite fascinating indeed. But before we wrap up, I just want to get a bit from you as to what you know about the SVG Indian Heritage Foundation.
Well, I remember first reading in the newspaper about the introduction of the Indian Heritage Foundation, and I remember when it was founded and when Dr. Thomas held up the immigration registry, which was handed over to the Indian Heritage Foundation, and he was able to acknowledge it as the national treasure that it really is. It really comes down to tell us about our true roots and who we are, where our families came from, and so forth. For about 15 years, I managed the unofficial Indian Heritage Foundation's Facebook group that grew to a membership of over 1,000 people, and I'm currently an administrator for both their website as well as their current Facebook group. So I've been pretty actively involved with the group, and one of the key things that I love about the groups that what we've been able to do is provide information to the younger generations, not only the younger generations, but the current generation or the older generations, just to let them know about who they are, their family history, how they're connected, etc. Because a lot of it gets lost in translation over the years, and people fade away, and the memories aren't, and the knowledge isn't always there. But through the Facebook pages, we were able to definitely provide people with insight into their own families that they just simply didn't know, or even their parents didn't know.
And what would you like to see the SVG Indian Heritage Foundation accomplish?
I guess I'd like to see the foundation focus on preserving our past history and finding ways to freely educate all Vincentians of all ages about their history, Vincentians of Indian heritage, about their history. Maybe hold free workshops where children and young adults can teach each other about the lives that their parents or grandparents lived, encourage them to sit down and talk to their grandparents, learn about their lives in the past, because at the end of the day, the information is going to get lost if we don't preserve it and make sure that these conversations are happening. I'd just love to see the history flourish and continue to be recognized by the younger generations, so that they can continue to pass it on and let their children know about exactly who they are, where they came from, and so forth.
Were you able to listen to any of the interviews that we did in 2020 and 2022 in terms of the 16 interviews?
I have. I've listened to all of them, and I've found them quite fascinating, and I've learned some stuff from them as well. I remember you did one recently with my great aunt Elise Morgan, or formerly Morgan, and I remember also there was one that you did with Walter Backus a while back, and he had mentioned something about my great grandfather Samuel Bullock and how his original last name was Backus, which really triggered some interest to me, because I know personally I've seen my grandfather's birth certificate, and it does list Samuel as a Bacchus. And I know that caused a lot of confusion when my grandfather was trying to share his land to his children, because the courthouse has said that his father was Bacchus and his name was Bullock. So he was actually Ishmael Bacchus and not Ishmael Bullock. And from doing some more digging, I found out that there was a time when different churches were rebaptizing people and giving them new last names. That's how my uncle George Hills also ended up being a Hills from a Baptiste, as well as Grandpa Samuel changing from Bacchus to Bullock, but it wasn't actually registered correctly. So these were just some of the things that I learned from the interviews, because Walter Bacchus did bring up the topic of great grandpa Samuel's last name being switched.
And before we wrap up, is there anything else you'd like to share with us?
Not so much, but I would like to encourage everybody to continue to try and learn about their history. And personally, if there's anybody out there that's interested in learning about their family connections and how they are how they're connected, how we're connected in different ways, feel free to reach out to me through through my Facebook profile. With my own personal family tree, I've got well over 2,000 names on it, and I could probably explain to you in detail exactly how different people are connected in one way or another. And I'd love to share that information with the broader audience.
Did you enjoy sharing your information with us today?
Absolutely. I think it was a great opportunity to share some of the knowledge that I've gathered over the last. I'd say I've probably been studying the family history for about 30 years now, since I was about 15 years old. Starting with small online bulletin boards and so forth, back long before the days of Facebook or anything like that. And that's how I started to get connected with some of the family, and then we ended up trading messages and learning different things from each other. And slowly over the 30 years, it's grown into my family tree of over 2,000 names now, as well as too many connections that I can even speak about.
So let me thank you very much. And on behalf of the SVG Indian Heritage Foundation, I wish to commend you on your outstanding work in researching all of our Indian connections, relatives, and providing us with this very rich, detailed information today. Thanks very much. And just to note that we'll be editing this piece and posting it across our platforms, Facebook and YouTube, and to ensure that all of our Indian connections can hear about this important information. Is that okay with you?
Absolutely. Thank you for hosting the interview.